Money Talk Sports in with the Week 11 college football predictions. And I'm going to say it right away. The matchups, they just don't seem as exciting as they were last week. I guess that is the consequence for having such a great game last week between Clemson and Notre Dame. A double overtime victory for the Irish to upset the number one team, Clemson. Although I feel like if Trevor Lawrence is able to play for Clemson, I think the Tigers could have won that by at least 10-13. So I'm trying something different this week. I am going to do picks against the spread this week. And the reason why I typically haven't been doing picks against the spread to begin with is because there's so many different sports books that have different lines, and the lines, they're not really consistent. So I'm using the ESPN Pick Center. I'm using their lines for this. And if there's kind of a sports book that does better lines or they're more consistent, comment that down below. And I'm going to consider doing picks against the spread in 2021. I did it for a couple weeks in 2017. After 3 weeks, I kind of stopped. But then I did it in 2018. Then last year, I didn't do it whatsoever. I think I did it one time last year. So as far as 2020, this is the first time that I'm doing picks against the spread. And in 2021, maybe I'll do it full time. Maybe I'll do it for the entire season next year. I'm just not sure yet. Without further ado, let's get to the Week 11 college football predictions. And our first matchup is a Friday night matchup between Iowa and Minnesota. And right now the current line is Iowa at -3. And this one, I think you could flip a coin for this one. I think this game can go in either direction. Both of these teams got their first win of the season last week. Iowa dominated Michigan State when Michigan State was coming off of an emotional win against Michigan the week prior. And Minnesota got their first win of the season, dominating against Illinois after losing a heartbreaker to Maryland in overtime the week before. And I have mixed feelings about this game. Minnesota's got a good running game, while Iowa has had some difficulty stopping the run at some point in the season. However, I think Iowa's defense is much better here in this game. Iowa's defense, they're pretty consistent, not giving too many points. In fact, they've only given up 20 points, and 7 points, while Minnesota's defense gave up over 40 points in their first two games of the season. So I'm going to go with Iowa at -3. I just think that Iowa, I think it took them a couple of weeks to really get the offense going, and I think it's going to continue this week. I think Iowa -3. Next, we have my number 9 Miami taking on Virginia Tech. Now, Virginia Tech, they suffered a heartbreaking loss against Liberty last week in a game where they should have won and they could have won. But they ultimately beat themselves, and to me, it looks like Justin Fuente is he on the hot seat right now. Some Virginia Tech fans are probably wanting him on the hot seat at this point. While Miami, they had a come-from-behind win against NC State last Friday night. And to my surprise, Virginia Tech is currently at a 2.5-point favorite. Now, I know that Miami, they could have lost last week, and Virginia Tech could have won last week. But the status of Virginia Tech running back Khalil Herbert is in question at this point, and the fact that that's in question, I have to kind of go with the quote-unquote upset here and take Miami at +2.5. I just think maybe Miami, I don't know, 1 week it's Miami's back, and then the next week Miami's being overhyped. But I think Miami can pull this one off, especially if Khalil Herbert isn't playing in this game. His status, as I said a moment ago, is in question. And De'Ara King, he looked phenomenal last week against NC State. So I'm going to take Miami +2.5. Next, we have Penn State and Nebraska, two teams that are looking for their first win of the season. For Penn State, I'm surprised they're 0-3 at this point. They probably should have beaten Indiana, and I'm really surprised they got dominated against by Maryland last week. While Nebraska, it is apparent that Scott Frost, I think he's going to show more favoritism towards Adrian Martinez moving forward. Although Luke McCaffrey, I feel like if Luke McCaffrey would have played in the entire second half, I think Nebraska probably wins that game. Although you do got to give credit to Northwestern's defense, though. They have not given up a single point in the second half yet this season. And Penn State is currently a 3.5-point favorite. And this one I think is tough to call as well. Because, Nebraska, they've shown their heart defensively so far, but offensively, not so much after that first drive against Ohio State in their season opener. But I'm going to pick Penn State at -3.5. I just think it's only a matter of time until Penn State really starts getting things going. I just think with the off year that we're experiencing in college football this season, I think it's getting to Penn State. We've seen it kind of get to LSU a little bit. We've seen it get to, I think, even Michigan. And I'm going to pick Penn State to win this and cover the 3.5. Nebraska, they haven't done really much. They didn't do anything last week to prove that I can really pick the upset here. I'm not sold on Nebraska yet moving forward, and I think that some Nebraska fans, they're starting to lose hope in Scott Frost. Some are starting to turn on Scott Frost. Scott Frost needs to quit calling the plays and let their OC call the plays. But I'm going to take the Nittany Lions in this game. Nebraska's had a hard time stopping the run, and you have a dual threat quarterback in Sean Clifford, that can throw and run the football, so I'm going to take Penn State. Next, we have number 10 Indiana taking on Michigan State. And I'm having a tough time with this one as well, because Indiana is a 7.5-point favorite, but it's that half a point that's really getting to me, because this game is tempting to call for the upset in this one, because we don't really know which Michigan State is going to show up to this game. Is it going to be the Michigan State that played last weekend against Rutgers? Or is it going to be the Michigan State team that came out with intensity and beat Michigan on all sides of the football? While for Indiana, they have looked impressive so far this season, but they do play Ohio State next week. So could they be looking ahead to this matchup? I think they could be a little bit. I think Indiana, they may win this game, but I can only see this being maybe a 4-point victory for the Hoosiers. So I am going to pick Michigan State to beat the 7.5-point spread, but I think Indiana does win the game, though. Indiana quarterback Michael Penix Jr., he appears to be one of the most if not the most underrated quarterback in college football, while Rocky Lombardi turned the football over quite a bit against Iowa, and Michigan State had turnovers against Rutgers. And can Michigan State's defense hold their own, keep the Spartans in this game? I think the Spartans will be able to hold on in this game just enough. I think they'll do just enough to to beat the 7.5-point spread. So I'm going Sparty on this one. Now, there are rumors that this game is at risk of being canceled, but Alabama and LSU. LSU has not looked good all season long. In fact, last time we saw the LSU Tigers, they got absolutely obliterated by Auburn. What was it, like 48-11? Just some score like that. Well, Alabama, they're coming off of a bye week. They're the new number one team in the country after Clemson lost. And Alabama so far, no problems without Jalen Waddle, one of the star wide receivers. And Alabama is a next man up mentality. And it's going to be the same thing, I think. And Ed Orgeron has already said that Miles Brennan, the anticipated starting quarterback going into the season, is going to be out again this week with an injury. So this is going to be a tough matchup for LSU. I know the line for this is Alabama minus 28. And while 28 does seem a little bit too much for an Alabama and LSU game, it feels like every single season Alabama and LSU was always hyped up. And except with the exception of last year, ever since 2013, Alabama has completely just been dominant. So I am going to pick the Crimson Tide in this to cover the 28-point spread. You can say 28 is probably a little bit too much, and it's tempting to pick LSU to beat that spread, but I just can't see it based off of Miles Brennan not being able to play, and LSU is going to be short-handed in this game. So I'm going to take the Crimson Tide. Next, we have the homecoming for Felipe Franks, Arkansas and Florida. Florida is right now a 17.5-point favorite in this matchup. For Arkansas, Felipe Franks, he is going to have a chip on his shoulder in this game. I mean, he really wants to beat his former team. While the Gators, they're coming off an emotional victory over Georgia. They finally got over that hump, and can they get to the next one? Getting the SEC championship game. Really, even winning the SEC championship game. So for the Gators, Kyle Pitts is questionable with a concussion. The 17.5-point spread. This was tempting as well to pick somewhat of an upset here against the spread. But I think that this is one of the best offenses that Arkansas is going to face all season. And even if Kyle Pitts doesn't play, I still think Florida has the capability of winning this by at least 18 to 20 points. Arkansas, though, I will give them credit, though. They have shown heart this season. I mean, they've been in almost every single ball game that they've played, and even leading Georgia at the half. Even leading against them early in that third quarter, even to the halfway point of the end of the third quarter. But I think Arkansas, it's kind of be a reality check here. I think Florida dominates this matchup against Felipe Franks and the Razorbacks. But I will say this. I think the future is bright for Sam Pittman and the Arkansas Razorbacks. I think maybe in about 5 years' time, we can talk about Arkansas possibly being a contender again in the SEC West. I'd say could be about 5 to 7 years, but I'd say maybe 5. Because this turnaround isn't going so bad so far. They should be above 500 right now, but I thought they got robbed against Auburn. But unfortunately, I think the Razorbacks, they're going to get humbled a little bit in this matchup against Kyle Trask and the Gators. And next is what is possibly going to be the game of the week, which I would speculate that this is where game day was wanting to be, but this game is also at risk of being canceled. One more cancellation for Wisconsin, and they won't be eligible to make it to the Big Ten Championship. And they go up against Michigan, a team that has completely gotten outplayed in these last 2 games. Well, for Wisconsin, if this game is going to get played, which I think this game is at risk, I think, because there's got to be some reason why game day didn't go here, well, in Ann Arbor, instead of going to the, well, they're choosing to go to the Masters instead of Ann Arbor, Michigan. So you really got to question why game day made that decision. Are they speculating this game is going to get canceled? I think maybe it could. I'd say maybe it's about 50-50 on this game. But if this game gets played, Wisconsin will be taking the field for the first time in over 21 days, in over 3 weeks. And while Michigan, they may have gotten outmanned in their last 2 games, and Jim Harbaugh could be on the hot seat at this point, I think Michigan can pull off this upset here. Wisconsin is right now a 2.5-point favorite. But Wisconsin, their running game really didn't get going that well against Illinois in their only game this season. While Michigan, I think that they can bounce back. I think Michigan can turn their season around, save Jim Harbaugh's season. well, not really his season, but probably his tenure at Michigan. I'm going to take Michigan to beat the 2.5 point spread and to win outright. I'm going to pick the Wolverines in this game. I know this is the fourth time I'm picking Michigan to win this season, and they've let me down the last 2 weeks in a row. But I think they can get this done, especially with an inexperienced quarterback in Graham Mertz, who only has one game as a college football starter, while Joe Milton, he's not there yet, but he's going to get there. At least he has some more college football action in him than Graham Mertz has. So I'm going to take the Wolverines. Now, before I wrap this up, I do want to do a bonus game here, just in case one of the games does happen to get canceled, as Alabama and LSU and Wisconsin and Michigan are at risk of cancellation. SMU and Tulsa. Right now, Tulsa is a 2.5 point favorite. I feel like Tulsa should have lost to East Carolina, because that's what happened the last time we saw Tulsa. They won in controversial fashion against East Carolina. While SMU, Shane Buechele, leading the nation in passing yards, and SMU's offense, it's starting to get going. They're missing some key players in their offense, but some are starting to step up. I know they got shut down by Cincinnati a couple of weeks ago, but I think this SMU offense is back. I think SMU is not only going to beat the 2.5 point spread, but I think they're going to win outright. So I'm going to take the Mustangs in this one. Although Tulsa, I do understand why they have the capability of winning this game, and I do understand that of why they're a 2.5 point favorite, mainly because they upset UCF earlier in the season, and they played their hearts out against Oklahoma State. So Tulsa has been playing some really good college football this year, but I just think Tulsa is going to run into a high-powered offense led by Shane Buechele and the SMU Mustangs. Although UCF was a pretty good offense when Tulsa faced him, and they pulled off the upset. So we'll see. And those are my picks for Week 11 of the college football season. I really wanted to try something different this week, with the matchups not being so good this week, at least not as good as it was last week. I guess that's what happens sometimes when you have two top 10 matchups in the same week. It seems like every time we get good matchups with college football, the next week they don't really seem as good. But like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time.